5 years ago, me and some friends got drunk and thought camping would be a fun idea. The next morning, when we weren't drunk anymore, we still thought it sounded like a good plan. It was summer break, so we grabbed our stuff and went in 2 cars. We unloaded our stuff and began searching for a good spot to camp. We didn't want to walk too far because we wanted to keep drinking and partying without any trouble. We walked for what seemed like a long time. I had to carry a heavy backpack full of cans, and as we went on, everyone in our group started complaining more because we knew it would take even longer to get more beers once we ran out. My friend who was leading us was named Chet. He kept saying he knew the place well and that there was a great spot just ahead. Hearing him say, just a little further up, still annoys me today because he said it so many times. After walking for 3 whole hours, we all agreed it was time to turn back. But luckily, just 5 minutes later, we stumbled upon a small but okay spot to camp. It wasn't the one Chet had promised us. We were tired, so we decided to settle there and start drinking. At some point, Chet went off to pee and took a long time to come back. We thought maybe Chet needed to poop, so we waited for him, but after 40 minutes we got worried. How far could he have gone? We realized we should go search for him. There was no cell phone signal out here in the wild. We grabbed flashlights and started looking around. The ones who went to look for Chet came back quickly and said they couldn't find him nearby. We started to feel anxious. Some of us suggested calling the police, but we thought Chet was responsible, so maybe he was just upset and looking for the other campsite. Some of us believed that, but not me. I knew Chet pretty well, and I didn't think he'd wander off without us. He wasn't that drunk yet. I was thinking about whether to call the cops or not, but it was late and dark, and I wasn't sure if I could find my way back. So I decided to wait until morning to decide what to do. Morning arrived, but Chet's tent was still empty. We got really worried. We shouted and called out for him, but there was no response. I told my friends I was going back to call the cops. I ran back as fast as I could, scared for my friend. When I reached the cops, I was out of breath and panicked. They said they'd investigate. To make it short, we searched with the people the cops sent, but we couldn't find Chet. It was really scary. This happened a few years ago, and we still don't know what happened to him. There was no body, no animals around that could have hurt him, as far as we know, and no dangerous spots nearby. My friends and I went back to look for any signs of our friend, but he disappeared without a trace. When I was a kid, my grandma took me camping. I also went to a summer camp with my friends in the mountains when I was younger. We liked exploring the woods together. I used to play in the woods for a long time with my brother. It was always fun and exciting, but I want to tell you about another time that wasn't so good. When we were in our 20s, a friend of mine in DC arranged a camp for us and some other girls. There were probably 7 or 8 of us, I can't remember exactly. The land was really pretty, but the roads were in bad shape. We rented a cabin at a campground that had lots of cabins. During the day, our teacher would take us around and teach us cool stuff, like about plants that can be used as medicine, or how to make rope from milkweed. There was a big family reunion happening nearby with a family from West Virginia. 2 or 3 girls around elementary school age kept hanging around our classes. They already knew a lot of what we were learning. We had a good time in the woods and on the land with no creepy feelings on the first night. On the last night, the campground owner had a big bonfire with hot dogs, marshmallows to roast, and cider. Everyone renting a cabin was invited. It was dark outside, and the bonfire was on the campground's land. So my friend A and I chose to walk there instead of driving, even though it was a bit of a walk. We were walking and talking happily when we suddenly felt uneasy. We both went quiet and acted like nothing was wrong, but we looked around carefully. To our right, there was a cabin that seemed empty. It was completely dark with no lights on, except for one small spot of light. We saw the glowing end of a cigarette, like red sparks in the darkness. It was hard to see, but we could make out a man sitting there smoking. We didn't say anything, but we walked faster. We looked at each other to make sure we were both okay. When we reached the big house in the light of the bonfire, we felt relieved. But thinking back, being out there in the dark felt creepy to us. We felt calm and secure before. The land never seemed creepy to us, but the man sitting in the dark gave off a really scary feeling, even from 20 feet away before we saw him. We told some of our friends about it, but they just laughed and said we were scared for no reason. They said he's just another camper, maybe with the West Virginian family. They said we're just being paranoid. Besides that, we had a good time at the bonfire. We talked to other campers and the owners, who were really friendly. When it was time to go to bed, the owners offered to drive us back, and A and I were happy to accept. Not wanting to walk by the creepy cabin again, we made it back to our cabin without any problems, and the owners said goodnight to us. Our cabin had 2 floors. The ground floor was one big open room with a few beds, and I think there was also a table, chairs, a fridge, and maybe a stove. I slept downstairs with 3 other girls, while A slept upstairs with 2 other girls. I often have trouble sleeping, and that night was no different. I stayed awake in the dark while everyone else slept. I lay there for hours, lost in my thoughts, until I heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel outside. I nudged my friend V, who was closest to me. I told V that someone was outside, but V just mumbled and said it's probably a deer, and to go back to sleep. So V wasn't much help. I got out of bed and crawled over to the window to see if I could spot a deer outside, but instead, I saw the red glow of a cigarette. I could barely make out the shapes of 2 men in the darkness. The 2 cabins weren't really close. They weren't far, but they weren't right beside each other. Our cabin was on a bend in the camp road, where there weren't any other cabins nearby. The closest one was a short walk away, but it wasn't like being just across the street or next door. It was hidden behind trees and bushes, so we couldn't see it easily. Anyway, the other cabin was far enough that there shouldn't have been any other people out there smoking. I nudged V again and told her there were 2 guys there, but she insisted it was just a deer. At the time, my boyfriend had given me all our money to go on this trip, so I brought a big hunting knife and a small camp hatchet. I didn't really know what I could do, but I grabbed both of them and huddled by the window, waiting in the dark. Suddenly, a car alarm started blaring, and all the cars were parked in front of the house. People groaned and complained, saying, "Come on, turn off the alarm. Whose car is that?" I said, "I think it's mine," and found the remote to turn off the alarm. Everything went quiet, and we waited. But then the car alarm went off again. The girls got really annoyed and said, "Shut up with your car." Finally, I crawled over to V and said, "V, the guys are out there. I think they're messing with the other girl's car." But she just said, "It's probably a deer. Go to bed and leave me alone." Then the car alarm went off again, and they yelled at her to turn it off. Eventually, A came down the ladder. I went up to her and whispered, "A, there are 2 guys out there, and no one believes me. They keep saying it's a deer, but I saw them smoking in the back. You can't go out there alone." We put on our shoes, and I turned on the lantern. Holding the lantern in my left hand and the hatchet in my right, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. I hung the lantern on a hook. It was really bright and lit up the whole area in front of the cabin, including the parking lot with all the cars. For a moment, we couldn't see anyone there. I cautiously walked towards the front door and then around the car, trying the handles. No alarm went off when I tugged on them. "See, it wasn't a deer," I said. "Even when you tried to get into the car while it was locked, no alarm went off. Your alarm isn't very sensitive." "Someone's trying to get in," I whispered. We hurried back into the house and locked the door behind us. I turned off the lantern, and we sat in the dark, waiting for our eyes to adjust. A told me she hadn't been able to sleep well and had felt uneasy lying awake in the loft. I wondered if someone had tried to lure her out there, alone in the dark, and got scared off when we came back with a very bright lantern. We stayed there quietly, chatting together in the dark for hours, waiting to see if anything else would happen. But the car alarm didn't go off again. Finally, enough time had passed that we decided to go to bed. The car alarm stayed quiet for the rest of the night. The next morning, we packed up, and I drove back with A. Now, if there were ever a zombie apocalypse, I'd choose A for my team. She listened to our instincts and worked with me as a team to keep everyone safe. A few years ago, during a really cold winter, there was ice everywhere because the snow had frozen all over. It was dark outside when I took my dogs out for one last bathroom break before bed. As we walked out of the house through the sliding door onto the lower deck, I got a weird feeling like something wasn't right. Our house is right next to woods, so I'm used to hearing animals at night. But this time it was strange. I don't hear anything except the freezing wind blowing. Still, I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me. While my dog does his business in the backyard, I keep looking around nervously, half expecting a coyote or some other scary animal to come out from the trees. After my dog finished his business, he suddenly stopped and stared into the corner of the woods. It made me really scared, so I called him back inside. He rushed back to me. I locked the sliding door and closed the curtains, but I still felt uneasy. I checked all the locks on the doors again and again, then went to bed. Around 3 a.m, I was awake by the muffled sound of my dog barking from the basement, which was 2 floors below. Still groggy, I stumbled out of bed and made my way down 3 flights of stairs. When I reached the basement, I found my dog standing by the closed curtains, his head poking through as he barked furiously. I called my dog to come away from the door, but he ignored me. Feeling worried after the strange events earlier, I decided to take a look myself. With a deep breath, I pulled the curtains to the side. I looked into the darkness outside but didn't see nothing. I thought maybe a deer or raccoon had waked my dog in the yard. He kept whining at the door for a few more minutes, until I tempted him upstairs with a dog cookie. Then, I went back to bed and didn't have any more problems. Until the next morning, when I went downstairs to let the dog out. I opened the sliding door and stepped onto the deck while my dog happily bounded into the snow. Suddenly, I felt a chill as the freezing morning air hit me. Looking down, I saw something that made me freeze even more. There were human footprints frozen into the deck. They were clear, and I could even see the individual toes imprinted in the snow. The footprints were big, like those of a grown-up man. I looked around and saw they started at the deck, went to the sliding door, then toward the basement living room, and finally vanished off the side of the deck. I had my snow boots on, so I walked around, but I couldn't find any more footprints anywhere. When I was in 3rd grade, my school had a camp on the rugby field one Friday night. We didn't have tents, so we slept in the clubhouse on the field. It was a fun night. We played games, like hide and seek, sang songs, and joked around with the 3rd grade couples. It was really cool. But then, my friends and I decided to hide on the other side of the rugby field when all the lights were turned off. We had 3 flashlights, and as 3rd graders, we were feeling scared of the dark. We thought about hiding in the tree where we usually played during school breaks, but changed our minds when we saw 2 guys. They might have been teenagers, but to us, they looked big. It seemed like a silly idea. We quickly ran back to our clubhouse and told the 3 teachers who were staying overnight with us. They called all of us children inside the clubhouse to keep us safe and watch over us. One of the male teachers grabbed a flashlight and went to see if those 2 guys were really there and how they got in. I could see him from where I was. He stood there for about 2 minutes, then returned and told the other teachers he didn't see anything. But he said they should still call the police, just in case. He was too scared to go back alone. I get it, man. Later that night, 2 cops showed up, and a few minutes later, 2 more vans arrived. We were told to go home. Some parents weren't happy to pick us up at 10 p.m., and the kids without rides had to stay over at the teachers' houses. They never told us what the cops found that night. So, years later, now that I'm 16, something creepy happened. On Monday, when we went back to school, my friends and I went to the tree where we saw those two men. The tree had many cuts on it, like someone used a knife, and there were numbers written all over the tree. But what really scared us was seeing a big hole, big enough for a person, covered up with sand. After seeing that, my friends and I decided we shouldn't sit there anymore. Later, I found out that a mentally ill person was forced to bury a body there that night. We were really near that spot when we were playing hide and seek, and I'm so relieved we didn't go any closer. We might have ended up like the person who was buried in our school's ground.